Ladies, I need to tell you something that happened 3 weeks ago, something that changed everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. My hands are still shaking as I tell you this story, because what I discovered in that package wasn't just shocking, it was a wake-up call that every woman over 45 needs to hear. If you're watching this right now, if you're feeling like something in your life isn't quite right, like there are secrets swirling around you that you can't quite put your finger on, then please, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share with you might save you from the heartbreak I almost walked into blindly. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was having my coffee by the kitchen window, the way I do every morning since my divorce 2 years ago. That window overlooks Mrs. Henderson's driveway next door. She's 83, lives alone since her husband passed, and I've always kept an eye on her, you know? The way we women look out for each other. But that morning, something was different. Mrs. Henderson, this frail little woman who usually struggles to carry her groceries, was standing by her mailbox holding a package that was almost as long as she was tall. It was wrapped in brown paper, taped meticulously, and the way she clutched it to her chest, looking left and right like she was afraid someone might see her, that's when I knew something wasn't right. You have to understand, I've lived next to Mrs. Henderson for 15 years. I know her routine better than my own. She gets her mail at exactly 10:30 every morning. She waters her petunias at 4 in the afternoon, and she's in bed by 8:30 sharp. But there she was, at 7 in the morning, in her nightgown and slippers, holding this mysterious package like her life depended on it. The way she hurried back to her house, stumbling slightly, glancing over her shoulder, it sent chills down my spine. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. How many times in your own life have you noticed something that didn't feel right, but you brushed it off? How many times have you seen red flags waving right in front of your face, but you told yourself you were being paranoid, being dramatic, being too suspicious? I'm 52 years old, and I've learned the hard way that when something feels wrong, it usually is. When your instincts are screaming at you, you need to listen. For the next 3 days, I watched Mrs. Henderson's house more carefully. And what I saw made my blood run cold. She wasn't following her normal routine anymore. Her curtains stayed closed all day. She stopped watering her petunias. She didn't pick up her mail. But every evening, around midnight, I would see a dim light moving around in her living room, like she was carrying a flashlight or a candle. Sometimes I could hear what sounded like whimpering, like a wounded animal. On Friday night, I couldn't take it anymore. The fear was eating me alive. What if Mrs. Henderson was in trouble? What if someone was threatening her? What if that package contained something dangerous? I had to know. So I did something I've never done before in my life. I walked over to her house at midnight, and I looked through her living room window. What I saw will haunt me forever. Mrs. Henderson was sitting on her living room floor, surrounded by photographs. Hundreds of them. Old photographs, new photographs, some I recognized, some I didn't. And there, in the center of it all, was that long package, open now, and inside it was a wooden walking stick, beautifully carved, with intricate designs that seemed to tell a story. But it wasn't the walking stick that made me gasp and step back from the window. It was Mrs. Henderson's face. She was crying, but not tears of sadness. These were tears of relief, of joy, of something I couldn't understand. I stood there in the darkness, watching this elderly woman I thought I knew, and I realized I didn't know her at all. Who had sent her that package? Why was she so secretive about it? Why was she surrounded by all those photographs? And why did she look like she had just been set free from some invisible prison? The next morning, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I kept thinking about what I had seen, about the secrets that apparently lived right next door to me, about how little we really know about the people in our lives. And that's when it hit me, like a lightning bolt of clarity. How many secrets was I keeping? How many things in my own life was I hiding, even from myself? You see, ladies, we reach a certain age, and we think we have life figured out. We think we know who we are, who the people around us are, what our relationships mean. But the truth is, we're all carrying secrets. We're all hiding parts of ourselves, sometimes even from the people we love most. And sometimes, those secrets aren't protecting us, they're destroying us. That Sunday, I made a decision that terrified me. I walked over to Mrs. Henderson's house, and I knocked on her door. When she opened it, She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Recognition. Not recognition of who I was, but recognition of what I had seen. She invited me in for tea, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw the inside of her living room. The photographs were gone, put away, but the walking stick was there, leaning against her favorite armchair. It was even more beautiful up close, carved with symbols and patterns that seemed to dance in the afternoon light. Mrs. Henderson sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her teacup, and she began to tell me a story that changed everything I thought I knew about life, about love, about the choices we make when we think no one is watching. 58 years ago, when Mrs. Henderson was 25, she fell in love with a man named David. But David wasn't the man she was supposed to marry. She was engaged to Robert Henderson, a good man, a stable man, the man her parents approved of. But David was different. He was an artist, a dreamer, someone who saw the world in colors she didn't even know existed. They had a secret relationship for 6 months, meeting in hidden places, writing letters they had to destroy, living a love story that could never see the light of day. The walking stick, she told me, was something David had carved for her. Every symbol, every pattern, every curve told the story of their love. It was his way of giving her something permanent, something that would last even if they couldn't. But when her parents found out about David, they gave her an ultimatum. Marry Robert, or lose her family, her home, her entire life as she knew it. She chose safety. She chose what was expected. She married Robert Henderson and never saw David again. But she kept the walking stick hidden in her attic for 58 years, unable to throw it away, unable to forget the love that might have been. David had died 3 months ago. His daughter, going through his belongings, found letters. Letters he had written to Mrs. Henderson but never sent. Letters that talked about the walking stick, about the love he never forgot, about the regrets that haunted him until his final breath. His daughter had tracked down Mrs. Henderson and sent her the walking stick, along with all those letters, so she would know that David never stopped loving her, never stopped thinking about her, never stopped regretting the choice they were forced to make. As Mrs. Henderson told me this story, I felt something breaking open inside my chest. Here was this woman, 83 years old, finally holding the truth of her greatest love, finally able to grieve not just for David, but for the life she never lived, the choices she never made, the woman she never became. But here's what really shook me to my core. As I sat there, listening to her story, I realized I was doing the same thing. Not with a hidden love, but with hidden parts of myself. I was 52 years old, and I was still living my life based on what other people expected of me, what other people thought was safe, what other people thought was right. After my divorce, I had retreated into this small, careful life. I watched my neighbor from my kitchen window instead of living my own adventures. I worried about what people would think instead of pursuing what made me happy. I was so focused on being the good divorced woman, the one who didn't cause trouble, who didn't make waves, who didn't ask for too much, that I had forgotten who I really was underneath all those expectations. That night, I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I got out a piece of paper and wrote down all the things I had stopped doing, stopped wanting, stopped dreaming about because they didn't fit into the neat little box of who I was supposed to be at my age. The list was longer than I expected, and more heartbreaking. I had stopped painting, something I loved in college, because divorced women my age were supposed to focus on practical things, not artistic pursuits. I had stopped traveling, even though I had always dreamed of seeing the world, because traveling alone felt too scary, too selfish, too much like I was flaunting my independence. I had stopped dating, not because I didn't want companionship, but because I was afraid of being judged, afraid of being hurt again, afraid of people thinking I was desperate or pathetic. But most importantly, I had stopped trusting myself. Every decision I made, I second-guessed. Every feeling I had, I questioned. Every dream that surfaced, I pushed down. I had become a prisoner of my own fear, just like Mrs. Henderson had been a prisoner of her secret love. Now, I want to pause here and talk directly to you, because I know you're watching this for a reason. I know there's something in your life that brought you to this story, something that's making you feel restless, unsettled, like you're living someone else's life instead of your own. Maybe you're in a relationship that feels more like a habit than a choice. Maybe you're staying with someone because it's easier than facing the unknown, even though you know in your heart that you've grown into different people who no longer fit together. Maybe you're pretending to be happy when you're actually dying inside, smile by smile, day by day. Or maybe you're like I was, hiding from life altogether. Maybe you've convinced yourself that you're too old to start over, too set in your ways to change, too damaged from past hurts to risk being vulnerable again. Maybe you're watching other people live their lives while you stay safely on the sidelines, telling yourself it's better this way, it's smarter this way, it's the responsible thing to do. But here's what I learned from Mrs. Henderson's story, and here's what I need you to understand. There is no safety in hiding from yourself. There is no peace in living a life that isn't truly yours. There is no wisdom in choosing fear over love, over growth, over the possibility of something beautiful. Mrs. Henderson spent 58 years wondering, what if? 58 years carrying the weight of a choice she made based on fear rather than love. And while I'm not saying she should have destroyed her family or abandoned her responsibilities, I'm saying that we need to be honest about the cost of always choosing the safe path, the expected path, the path that makes everyone else comfortable while slowly killing something essential inside of us. The week after my conversation with Mrs. Henderson, I started making different choices. Small ones at first, because change doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. I signed up for a painting class, even though I was terrified I would be terrible at it, even though I was the oldest person in the room, even though I had to fight the voice in my head that kept asking who I thought I was to be taking art classes at my age. I planned a solo trip to Italy, something I had dreamed about for 20 years but never done because it seemed too indulgent, too risky, too much like something the old me would do instead of the responsible post-divorce me I was trying to be. I started saying no to social obligations that drained me and yes to activities that sparked something inside me, even when people didn't understand my choices. But the biggest change was internal. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped explaining my decisions to people who hadn't earned the right to understand them. I stopped asking for permission to want what I wanted, to feel what I felt, to dream what I dreamed. And you know what happened? The sky didn't fall. My family didn't disown me. My friends didn't abandon me. In fact, some of them started asking me what had changed, why I seemed different, more alive, more like myself. Some of them started making their own brave choices, inspired by watching me choose authenticity over approval. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you it was easy. Change is never easy, especially when you're changing patterns you've held for decades. There were days when I wanted to retreat back into my safe, small life. There were moments when the old voices in my head were so loud I could barely hear my own truth underneath them. But every time I felt scared, I thought about Mrs. Henderson, sitting on her living room floor at 83, finally holding the walking stick that represented the love she never got to live fully. I thought about all those years she spent wondering, all those dreams she buried, all those parts of herself she never got to explore because she was too afraid of what other people would think, what other people would say, how other people would judge her choices. And I made a promise to myself that I would not reach 83 with a list of regrets longer than my list of adventures. I would not let fear make my choices for me anymore. I would not sacrifice my authentic self on the altar of other people's expectations. This is what I want you to understand, what I need you to hear with every fiber of your being. You are not too old to start over. You are not too damaged to heal. You are not too set in your ways to grow. You are not too anything to become who you were always meant to be before life and other people's opinions convinced you to become smaller, safer, more acceptable. But you have to choose it. You have to choose yourself, your dreams, your truth, even when it's scary, even when people don't understand, even when the path forward isn't clear. Because the alternative is spending the rest of your life like Mrs. Henderson spent 58 years, carrying the weight of unlived dreams, unexpressed love, unexplored possibilities. If you're in a relationship that's slowly suffocating your spirit, you have to be brave enough to have the hard conversations, to ask for what you need, to leave if necessary. If you're hiding from life because past hurts have made you afraid to be vulnerable again, you have to be willing to heal those wounds instead of protecting them. If you've been living according to someone else's script for your life, you have to find the courage to write your own story. I know it's terrifying. I know it feels impossible. I know there are 100 reasons why you can't, why you shouldn't, why it's too late, too risky, too selfish. But I also know that on the other side of that fear is a life that actually belongs to you, a life that reflects who you really are, not who you think you should be. Mrs. Henderson and I have become close friends over these past few weeks. She's teaching me about the art of letting go, about how to honor the past without being imprisoned by it, about how to find peace with the choices we've made while still having the courage to make different ones moving forward. She's also teaching me about resilience, about how the human heart can carry both grief and joy, both regret and hope, both the pain of what was lost and the possibility of what might still be found. At 83, she's learning to live with her whole heart for the first time in decades. She's sharing David's letters with his daughter, building a friendship that honors their father's love while creating something new and healing for both of them. She's also started volunteering at the local art center, teaching children how to carve wood, how to tell stories through their hands, how to create something beautiful from raw material. She's taken the love that she kept hidden for 58 years and transformed it into something that serves the world, something that helps other people discover their own creative spirits. This is what's possible when we stop hiding from ourselves, when we stop letting fear make our decisions, when we choose growth over safety, authenticity over approval, love over the comfortable numbness of a life half-lived. I want to leave you with this thought, this challenge, this invitation to your own transformation. Tonight, when you're alone with yourself, when there's no one else to perform for or please or convince, I want you to ask yourself this question. If you knew you couldn't fail, if you knew no one would judge you, if you knew you had unlimited support and resources, what would you do with your life? What dreams would you pursue? What relationships would you heal or release? What parts of yourself would you finally allow to see the light? Write it down. Don't edit yourself. Don't make it practical. Don't worry about how it would happen. Just write down the truth of what your heart wants, what your soul is calling for, what the deepest part of yourself has been whispering to you in the quiet moments when you're not busy being who everyone else needs you to be. Then, take one small step toward that vision. Just one. It doesn't have to be dramatic or life-changing. It could be as simple as signing up for a class, having an honest conversation, planning a trip, setting a boundary, or saying yes to something that scares and excites you in equal measure. Because here's what I've learned. The walking stick was never the real treasure in Mrs. Henderson's story. The real treasure was her willingness, at 83 years old, to finally stop hiding from her own truth. The real treasure was her courage to feel all the feelings she had been avoiding, to grieve what was lost while still being open to what might be found. Your treasure isn't hiding in some mysterious package that might show up at your door. Your treasure is hiding inside you, waiting for you to be brave enough to unwrap it, to claim it, to live it, to share it with the world. You have more time than you think. You have more strength than you know. You have more love to give and receive than you've allowed yourself to believe. But you have to choose it. You have to choose yourself. You have to choose the life that's actually yours instead of the one you think you should have. The walking stick in Mrs. Henderson's story was carved with symbols that told the story of a love that transcended time, distance, and circumstance. What symbols would be carved on the walking stick of your life? What story are you telling with your choices, your courage, your willingness to be authentically, unapologetically yourself? I'm still figuring it out, still learning, still growing, still making mistakes and trying again. But I'm no longer watching life from my kitchen window. I'm living it, messy and imperfect and beautiful and real. And every day, I'm becoming more myself instead of less. But let me tell you what happened next, because this story doesn't end with just my transformation or Mrs. Henderson's revelation. What happened next showed me just how deep the web of secrets and hidden truths runs in all of our lives, and how one act of courage can create ripples that change everything. 2 weeks after Mrs. Henderson shared her story with me, something extraordinary happened. Her neighbor on the other side, Mrs. Martinez, knocked on my door. She was holding a bottle of wine and had tears in her eyes. She said she had seen Mrs. Henderson and me talking in the garden, had noticed how different Mrs. Henderson seemed, how much lighter, how much more alive. And she wanted to know if she could tell us something too. We sat in my living room that evening, 3 women spanning 3 decades of life, and Mrs. Martinez began to unravel a secret she had carried for 27 years. When she was 48, the same age I am now, she had discovered that her husband was having an affair. Not a brief fling, not a moment of weakness, but a full relationship with a woman who worked at his office. She had found love letters, seen credit card statements for hotels and restaurants she had never been to, watched him lie to her face day after day. But instead of confronting him, instead of demanding the truth, instead of fighting for herself, she had chosen silence. She convinced herself that it was better for the children, better for the family, better to keep the peace than to face the ugly truth. She spent the next 15 years of her marriage pretending she didn't know, pretending everything was normal, pretending her heart wasn't breaking a little more each day. Her husband died of a heart attack 3 years ago, never knowing that she knew, never having to face the consequences of his betrayal, never having to explain or apologize or choose between his two lives. And Mrs. Martinez was left with a grief so complex, so tangled, that she couldn't even properly mourn the man who had been both her beloved husband and her secret tormentor. As she told us her story, I felt that familiar sensation, that recognition of a truth I didn't want to acknowledge. Because I realized that I had done the same thing in my own marriage, in different ways. Not about an affair, but about so many other things. The way my ex-husband dismissed my opinions, belittled my dreams, made me feel small and insignificant. The way he would rage and then act like nothing had happened. The way he slowly, systematically eroded my confidence until I barely recognized the woman I used to be. I had known, somewhere deep inside, that I was losing myself. But instead of facing it, instead of demanding better, instead of fighting for the woman I used to be, I had adapted. I had made myself smaller, quieter, more agreeable. I had convinced myself that this was just what marriage looked like, what compromise meant, what love required. It took me 2 years after the divorce to understand that what I had called love was actually a slow form of self-abandonment. And sitting there with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Martinez, I realized that this is what we do. We women, especially those of us who were taught that keeping the peace is more important than keeping ourselves whole. We carry secrets that aren't even our own. We protect people who don't protect us. We sacrifice our truth on the altar of everyone else's comfort. But here's what I learned that night, what these two incredible women taught me about the power of breaking silence. When Mrs. Martinez finally spoke her truth, when she finally acknowledged the pain she had carried alone for all those years, something shifted in the room. It was like watching someone exhale a breath they had been holding for decades. And then Mrs. Henderson did something beautiful. She reached over and took Mrs. Martinez's hand and said, "You survived something that would have destroyed many people. You protected your children from chaos they were too young to handle. You made the best choice you could with the information and resources you had at the time. But now you get to make different choices. Now you get to choose healing over protection, truth over peace, your own well-being over everyone else's comfort." That's when I understood something profound about forgiveness, about healing, about the difference between the choices we make when we're trapped and the choices we make when we're free. Mrs. Martinez hadn't been weak for staying quiet about her husband's affair. She had been protecting her family the only way she knew how. But now, with her husband gone and her children grown, she had the opportunity to choose something different for herself. Over the following weeks, the three of us began meeting regularly. We called ourselves the Tuesday Night Truth Tellers, and we created a space where we could say the things we had never said, acknowledge the feelings we had never allowed ourselves to feel, and support each other through the messy, beautiful process of reclaiming our authentic selves. Mrs. Henderson started attending grief counseling, not just for David, but for all the versions of herself she had never allowed to exist. She joined a seniors hiking group and discovered that at 83, she was stronger and more adventurous than she had ever imagined. She even started dating someone she met in her wood carving class, a widower named Frank who brings her wildflowers and listens to her stories about David without jealousy or judgment. Mrs. Martinez began therapy to work through her complicated grief and discovered that underneath all that pain was a well of rage she had never allowed herself to feel. She started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, using her experience to help other women recognize the signs of emotional abuse they might be missing in their own lives. She sold the house she had shared with her husband and bought a small apartment near the beach, something she had always wanted but never thought she deserved. And me. I kept painting, kept traveling, kept making choices that prioritized my authentic self over other people's expectations. But more importantly, I started sharing my story with other women, started talking openly about the ways we lose ourselves in relationships, in family dynamics, in societal expectations about who we should be and how we should behave. I want to pause here and talk about something that might be uncomfortable for some of you to hear, but it's crucial that we address it. One of the biggest obstacles to living authentically, especially for women our age, is the guilt we feel about putting ourselves first. We've been conditioned to believe that self-care is selfish, that prioritizing our own needs makes us bad mothers, bad wives, bad daughters, bad friends. But here's what I've learned through this journey, what Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Martinez and countless other women have taught me. You cannot love others well if you don't love yourself well. You cannot give from an empty cup. You cannot be fully present for anyone else if you're not fully present for yourself. The guilt you feel about choosing yourself isn't evidence that you're being selfish. It's evidence of how thoroughly you've been programmed to believe that your needs don't matter, that your dreams don't count, that your happiness is less important than everyone else's comfort. Let me share with you some of the specific ways this programming shows up, because I guarantee you're experiencing at least some of these patterns without even realizing it. You say yes when you mean no because you're afraid of disappointing people. You apologize for things that aren't your fault because you've learned that taking responsibility, even for things beyond your control, keeps the peace. You minimize your own pain, your own struggles, your own needs because you've been taught that other people's problems are always more important than yours. You stay in relationships that drain you because you're afraid of being alone, afraid of being seen as difficult, afraid of admitting that you made a mistake in choosing this person in the first place. You don't pursue your dreams because you tell yourself you're too old, too inexperienced, too whatever, when the real truth is that you're terrified of failing, terrified of succeeding, terrified of finding out who you really are when you're not busy being who everyone else needs you to be. You carry other people's secrets, other people's shame, other people's emotional baggage because you've convinced yourself that this is what loyalty looks like, what love requires, what being a good person means. But carrying secrets that aren't yours to carry isn't loyalty, it's codependency. Protecting people from the consequences of their own choices isn't love, it's enabling. Being a good person doesn't mean being a doormat for everyone else's dysfunction. I learned this lesson the hard way 6 months ago when my adult daughter called me in crisis. She had been struggling with addiction for 2 years, something I had suspected but she had denied. She was calling because she needed money, needed a place to stay, needed me to fix the mess her choices had created, just like I had done so many times before. But this time, instead of immediately rushing to her rescue, instead of dropping everything to solve her problems, I took a breath and asked myself, am I helping her or am I enabling her? Am I showing her love or am I showing her that I don't believe she's capable of handling her own life? For the first time in her adult life, I said no. I told her I loved her, I told her I believed in her ability to figure this out, and I told her I would support her if she chose to get professional help, but I would not continue to shield her from the natural consequences of her choices. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. The guilt was overwhelming. The fear that something terrible would happen to her was paralyzing. But I held my boundary, and you know what happened? She got angry, she tried to manipulate me, she accused me of not loving her, and then, when none of that worked, she got help. She's been in recovery for 4 months now, and our relationship is stronger than it's ever been because it's based on honesty instead of codependency, on real love instead of fear-based enabling. She recently told me that my refusal to rescue her was the wake-up call she needed to start rescuing herself. This is what happens when we stop carrying secrets that aren't ours to carry, when we stop protecting people from the consequences of their own choices, when we start believing that the people we love are strong enough to handle their own lives. We give them the gift of their own power. We give them the opportunity to become who they're meant to be instead of who they've learned to be when someone else is always cleaning up their messes. But it's not just about our relationships with other people. It's about our relationship with ourselves. How many secrets are you keeping from yourself? How many truths are you avoiding? How many dreams are you dismissing before you even give them a chance? I want you to think about the last time you were truly, authentically happy. Not content, not comfortable, not fine, but actually happy. Joyful. Excited about your life. Proud of who you were becoming. Can you remember? How long has it been? If you can't remember, or if it's been longer than you want to admit, then it's time to start asking some difficult questions. What would have to change for you to feel that way again? What would you have to let go of? What would you have to start saying yes to? What would you have to stop saying yes to? The answers might scare you. They might require changes you're not sure you're ready to make. They might challenge relationships you've built your entire identity around. But I promise you this, the temporary discomfort of change is nothing compared to the permanent ache of living a life that isn't truly yours. Mrs. Henderson is 83 years old, and she's just now learning what it feels like to live without shame, without regret, without the crushing weight of unlived dreams. Mrs. Martinez is 75, and she's just now discovering what it feels like to be angry about the things that deserve anger, to grieve the things that deserve grief, to want what she wants without apologizing for it. How old will you be when you finally give yourself permission to be authentic? How much time will you spend living in the shadows of your own potential? How many more years will you waste pretending to be someone you're not in order to make other people comfortable? The walking stick in Mrs. Henderson's story was carved with symbols that told a story of love. But every choice you make, every boundary you set, every dream you pursue or abandon is carving symbols into the walking stick of your own life. What story are those symbols telling? Are they telling the story of a woman who chose love over fear, authenticity over approval, growth over safety? Or are they telling the story of someone who played it safe, kept quiet, made herself small in order to keep everyone else happy? You still have time to change the story. You still have the power to pick up the carving tools and create something beautiful, something true, something that reflects who you really are instead of who you think you should be. But you have to choose it. You have to choose yourself. You have to choose the life that calls to your soul instead of the life that looks good on paper. 3 months ago, I made a decision that terrified me. I decided to start this YouTube channel, to share these stories, to talk openly about the things we're not supposed to talk about. The shame, the secrets, the ways we abandon ourselves, the courage it takes to choose authenticity in a world that rewards conformity. I was terrified that people would judge me, that they would think I was too old to be starting something new, too damaged to have anything valuable to offer, too ordinary to have stories worth telling. But I decided that my fear of judgment was less important than my desire to connect with other women who might be struggling with the same questions, the same doubts, the same longing for something more authentic, more real, more truly their own. And you know what happened? Women started reaching out to me. Women who had been carrying secrets for decades. Women who had been living lives that looked perfect on the outside but felt empty on the inside. Women who had given up on their dreams so long ago they had forgotten they ever had any. Each story was different, but the theme was always the same. We had all learned to make ourselves smaller, quieter, more agreeable than we actually were. We had all sacrificed parts of our authentic selves in order to fit into boxes that were too small for our actual size. We had all chosen safety over growth, approval over authenticity, other people's comfort over our own truth. But we were all also discovering that it's never too late to make different choices. It's never too late to reclaim the parts of ourselves we abandoned. It's never too late to start living the life that's actually ours instead of the one we think we should have. This is my invitation to you, my challenge to you, my promise to you. If you're ready to stop hiding from yourself, if you're ready to stop living someone else's version of your life, if you're ready to discover what's possible when you choose courage over comfort, then stay with me. Keep watching, keep learning, keep growing. Because your story isn't over. The best chapters might still be unwritten. And the walking stick that represents your authentic life is waiting for you to pick it up, to lean on it, to let it support you as you walk the path that's truly yours. But more than that, there are other women out there who need to hear your story, who need to see your courage, who need to know that it's possible to change, to grow, to become more yourself instead of less, no matter how old you are, no matter how stuck you feel, no matter how impossible it seems. The mystery isn't what was in Mrs. Henderson's package. The mystery is what's inside of you, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be lived, waiting to be shared with the world. The mystery is what becomes possible when you finally stop apologizing for taking up space, when you finally stop asking permission to want what you want, when you finally stop choosing everyone else's comfort over your own truth. Thank you for listening to my story, for witnessing my truth, for being brave enough to consider your own. Thank you for being part of this community of women who are choosing authenticity over approval, growth over safety, love over fear. Until next time, remember, you are not too late, you are not too anything. You are exactly where you need to be to begin becoming who you were always meant to be. The walking stick is waiting. The story is ready to be carved. The only question is, are you ready to pick up the tools and start creating the life that's actually yours? Are you ready to find out?